Hello and welcome to this bubble video on data types and what they are, how they work. We're going to go on types versus fields, creating them, displaying them, the pages and data types, so how to send kind of data to a new page, and joining types, especially noting all the common pitfalls I notice people, clients I have make, and making sure that you hopefully do not repeat them. I also at one point was a beginner and did many of them too. So we're gonna create a recipe app and people can post recipes, add the ingredients and steps for the recipes. So let's do that by creating a new type. Because there will be lots of new recipes, we add a new data type called recipe. And then there will also be lots of ingredients. So we have a new type called ingredient. And there will also be a new type called steps or recipe steps. So we also add that. And to make them easy to find, we just add some numbers to them with the benefit that now they're all at the top. So we start with the ingredients. It's a very simple data type. Each ingredient will just have a text related to it. And also, no, I think we just leave it at that. And then a recipe also has a name, type text, and a description, type text, and a list of ingredients, which allows us to join two data types. So it's a list, and we can actually now select ingredients because we created the data type ingredients. So this is how we join two data types. Okay, and a step has a recipe that it is associated with. That's another way to join data types. So here in this example, a recipe has a list of ingredients, and in this example is each step has one recipe associated with. Both work. We'll see them in action. Okay, and then the step also has text. Like, I don't know, peel the onions, wash the tomatoes, combine the onions and tomatoes, etc. Okay, and what we actually did here, if you know Excel, is we basically created 3 sheets which have all the rows. So there will be hundreds of rows for different recipes. That's one sheet, another sheet with hundreds of rows of ingredients, and another one with hundreds of steps. And then we can go to app data just to see what's happening, and we can add some ingredients by clicking new entry, such as tomato or tomato, depending how you prefer. Then we have cheese. Then we have, what else? Onions. Meat, we leave it at that. And then notice that although we only selected underneath ingredients that we have one column called text, Bubble always creates these 4 other columns with it: the creator, modified date, created date, and slug, which is kind of helping the website URL look nice. We're not going to use that. There are videos on slugs. Okay, so therefore, when we see the ingredients, we don't only see the text, but we see created date, modified date, and also a unique ID. This is very useful because it uniquely tells Bubble that this unique ID is related to onions. And what it means is that when we create a new recipe, we click new entry here, we can have a name such as pizza, and then the description is really tasty, round Italian meal. And now we've got this unique ID we copied from the recipes. We can now paste it here and add it, and now create it. So we've got one ingredient added to the pizza already. And similarly, we can also take another one. I don't remember honestly which one I copied. Must have from Alzheimer's. And it's a different one. Great. So we click save, but this is just us, the admin. So what we basically did is we created 4 rows for ingredients and 1 row of one recipe. Maybe we can create a second one. It's always good to have more than one. So lasagna could be it. It also has a tomato in it, and the description can be the only dish Garfield likes. If you are not familiar with Garfield, he's a very grumpy cat in American, I believe, or maybe a British cartoon. Okay, and we notice we might have not properly saved one of the data types. Have to click add and then save, and then perhaps another one. 860. And save. So we can have more than one ingredient, and we can have the same ingredients for lasagna and pizza even. Okay, but of course, going to app data to add entries, that's only for you, the admin. We actually want a place where the user can add this. So we first start with a simple one, which is adding ingredients. We're going to just scroll down for this because we just want the admin to do this. You would have your own page maybe to do this. So we call this add ingredient. We call the import ingredient name. And when we click the button, we add a workflow to create a thing. What create a thing does, it means that we add one row to the data table, similar like we just did underneath app data, where we click new entry. That's the same, that's the equivalent of that workflow. And we just have to tell it which table we want to select. We want to add a new ingredient, so we select ingredient and tell it that the text of that one ingredient should be the inputs value, and then we can reset the input. Okay, so we've created that, but if you now look on preview, you'll see that we can add a new ingredient such as salad, but we won't see it anywhere. We will see it in the database, so we have added it over here, salad, but we want to display it. And we don't want to display just one, we want to display all ingredients. Therefore, we go for a repeating group. This is for displaying many things, many similar things. Therefore, it asks for a type of content. We want to display ingredients, and we want to search the entire database for all ingredients. And then we want to put a text element inside, otherwise we won't see anything. And we just want to show the current sales ingredients text. So here the first ingredient is shown and the text of that, and the second is shown, etc. In a similar way, we could also show the current sales ingredients, for example, creation date, and format it as a, nice date and time. But we just stay with the ingredient now for simplicity. Okay, and what we should now see is that we've got several ingredients showing up. So we just use a repeating group to show more than one ingredient. Great. But now we want to use this repeating group, and we drag it up because we want to actually create recipes. So in a similar way, we have a button called create recipe. Maybe we put it on here. And again, we have an input. If you remember, the recipe had a name, but also a description. So we call this recipe name, the input, and this recipe description. Okay, and now when we click create recipe, again we create a new thing, and again we select this time the table, recipe table. We want to add a row to it. And by the way, we don't have to fill all rows, we could only fill one. So we do input recipe names value, description, input recipe names description value, and now list of ingredients. I guess this is a little bit trickier. We're going to use a state for this. A state is a way to store information. We're going to show all ingredients here using the repeating group we had before, which shows all. And we're going to have a place where we can add an ingredient. And when we add it, what we're going to do is save that ingredient to a state. So we click element action set state. We're going to save the state to the entire page, let's say. We can choose, it can be, and actually I might have also already created the state before. So here I click the entire page and I click I. Let's delete it and pretend I didn't have it already. So we're going to create a new custom state, and we're going to call it ingredients selected. I like to capitalize the S to show that it is a list of things, because we will be able to select more than one ingredient, because for example lasagna has more than one ingredient, right? Okay, and what we want to do is we want to add that ingredient to our selection, and to do that we take the selection, which is the state already, so that's a page, this is where the state is saved to, and now we add it to the selection. So we take what's already in the selection and then add the current cell's ingredients to it. Current cell refers to whatever cell we click. So if we click the first one, we add the first ingredient to our selection. If we click the second one, it's the second one. Okay, so we take the past selection and add one item. Because let's say we didn't do that and we just took this one, we could have probably do something, convert it to list. The problem with this is we would just overwrite our entire selection, but we just want to add that ingredient to the ingredients we've already selected, and therefore we have to use the already selected ones plus this one. In a similar way, we might want a remove button, but before we do that, let's hide this button if we've already selected it. So therefore we refer to the page where the state is saved, the list of ingredients, and when data type ingredient selected contains the current cell, then we just want to make it invisible. Okay, now we can copy it to add a remove button, which has a very similar workflow but opposite. So we call this button remove, add the text remove, and maybe we change the color to something dark or so. And now we only want it to be visible when it contains. In this case, when it doesn't contain, actually. I have to correct myself here. And here we want a remove button when it does contain. We want it visible. And the element is not visible on page load. And here, again, the reverse of the workflow, we take our selection, but we subtract the item which we've just clicked remove on. Okay, now what we can do when we click the button create recipe, we can set a list. So we have the list of ingredients. We want that to be exactly the list that we've selected in the state. So the state is saved to the page, and here's the state, the list of ingredients. Okay, and then we reset the inputs. Okay, that's great. Meat and cheese, tasty and satiating. And now we notice that something is wrong with the buttons. So we check again. When the state contains it, we're invisible, and when it contains it, it's visible. Okay. So we can now do meat and cheese sandwich. Spelling is terrible, I'm not sure at this moment. Satiating piece of bread. We might, before we add that, add another ingredient called bread. When we've got bread, it's added to all ingredients down here. Now we can select bread and also remove it again, but we want to select it. We select meat. So we've got two things selected now, and we select cheese. Okay, now we can click create recipe, and this creates a recipe. But again, you may notice we're missing a place to display the recipe. But there's actually one difference compared to before, because here we want to display lots of ingredients, but now we just want to display one recipe. So instead of going for a repeating group, we go for a group to display one thing. And groups are very important in Bubble because they're used to kind of receive data. So here again, we have to tell it what data to expect. We want to show a recipe. There's a few different ways to control what this group shows. Just going to move things here to the left. One of the ways is actually similar to here. Here we search for all ingredients. In a similar way, we can search for all recipes. It will give us an error. The error will be that the data source should be one recipe, but it's now a list of recipes, because searching the backend for recipes will display all recipes underneath data and recipes here. So to control this, we can do, for example, first item, because that's only one item, so the error goes away. It will, in this case, display the first recipe ever created. We can also, again, of course, display the recipe here. And so in a similar way how here we showed one ingredient, here we show the group has one recipe it found, and of that recipe please show the name and the description, and also the ingredients. To show the ingredients, again, we have a repeating group because it's many things, it's many ingredients, and here we don't have to search for it, but we can actually take the parent groups, so the recipe selected list of ingredients, because this is a list of ingredients, and the repeating group is expecting ingredients, which is great. Current cells, ingredients, text. Okay, and now we should see the first one we created. I believe it was pizza. That's right. We can manipulate this by doing a few things. We could do last item to show the most recent one, or we could also add a constraint, so the name has to be pizza, lasagna. Yeah, of course we have to watch that the spelling is exactly the same as, of course it's case sensitive, but here we do see lasagna and it works. In a similar way, we can also go back to the database and go to recipe and look at the meat and cheese sandwich, and here not only the ingredients have a unique ID, but also every recipe has one. So we can copy this, and we can of course search for that one recipe whose unique ID equals that one. And we'll see now the meat and cheese sandwich. Okay. Now another way to manipulate this group is to use display data. So whenever we create a new recipe, we can actually use the element action display data. Again, element action display data to show in a group something. So which group? The group recipe, which is this group here on the right, showing one recipe. And then the data to display is the result of step 1. So the recipe we just created in the first step when we click create new recipe. And that will overwrite the meat and cheese sandwich. We'll see this soon. So we create a new one called tomato sandwich. Is that the spelling? I'm sorry, I have to check. Yeah, it looks right. Okay, tasty Catalonian sandwich. And we add tomato and bread. So we've got those two selected, click create, and here we see it now because we used display data to display that data here. Okay, that's already very useful, but let's go one step further and display all the recipes, not just one. Here we can actually copy this group, paste it, and now we use a mean trick, because you can see here that groups and repeating groups, they're all containers, and therefore we can click on their group and replace it with a repeating group, because when we display all recipes it will look quite similar to what we've got here. Okay, now we space it out to the side a little, down, we make it less rows, only 2 rows are shown because now we have room to do some basic formatting. We could of course also add a picture or something nice. But now, as you see, immediately Bubble recognized to show the current sales recipe's name, description. So here we would see the first recipe, here the second one. Okay, but as you saw here, there's an error. Why? Because it's again a mismatch. So above the group, of course, needs a first item because the group only shows one row of data. But here we show lots of rows, therefore we can't do first item, but we get rid of that. And also we don't want to search for just one unique ID, but we just want to get rid of that. Of course, we could also add something like list of ingredients contains one particular ingredient, or created by only the current user. So this would show all recipes created by me. But let's leave that out for the moment. We can also sort it, of course, by created date, so we have the newest at the top. And we will see this working. Here we see this recipe, then the second one, then the third. When we scroll down, they're all next to each other. And it works. Great. Okay. And now, one more thing. Maybe we don't want to show the ingredients on this page, but just the name. And then allow users to see more info on another page. So here we change the number of rows of the repeating group to 5, so they're closer together. We might maybe show an image, but we're just going to skip that. And we have a button called More. And when we click More, what we want the user to do is we want to go to another page to show more of that recipe, such as the ingredients and the steps, as you might know from your, favorite recipe site. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a workflow to the button and use navigation go to page, which goes to a certain page. You can create it here. We can call it show recipe, or just recipe maybe. And we don't want to clone it, we just want to create it. And here it is. And now what we ideally want to do is we want to take exactly the recipe we're clicking, like the first one or the third one, and display more of it. To do that, we send that recipe, current sales recipe. It will, however, tell us an error. Recipe's content type is not set. The data you're sending now is recipe. The reason for this is if you look at this entire page data types, we see the type of content is empty. It's expecting no particular type of content. So it's like it can use any. But in some cases, you want it to expect content because you want to use some, specific actions associated with what's on that page. In that case, you would go for type of content recipe when you want to see more of one recipe. We can also just click this arrow here and click to change recipe's content type to type recipe, which is what we want to do. Okay, and then we can go over to that page. And before we do that, you will notice if we click anything on this page to insert dynamic data, the options available are current user, do a search for, get an option. But one new action comes available on the new page called recipes. This is why we wanted to make it type recipe, because when we show the title, we can do current page recipe, because this page has type recipe, and so it's already filled with one recipe. So similar to how our group was filled with one recipe, also this page will be filled with one recipe. We can show the name, kind of as a heading maybe. Then we can show the description, current page recipe description, and then again we can show repeating group with ingredients, current page recipes list of ingredients, and the text. Okay, and you will notice a problem with this if we click preview. Because it says lorem ipsum. In the old bubble days it used to say nothing, and it might be confusing, but here we see the recipe bubble is displaying is called lorem ipsum because we didn't tell it which recipe to display. So therefore what we have to do is we have to go back to data types, and here in the selection we have to select one of them, like for example lasagna. And if we click more now, we now see lasagna. So it sent. Here you can see also the unique ID of lasagna because we added to the workflow to send the current cell, so lasagna with it. And now it received it and is displaying it because we told the page to display recipe data. And we can now refer to it. And now we might also want to add steps to the recipe. So for example, we could have an input and a button step, and what this does is it creates a new step. So again, we create a new thing, and to the recipe step, so we add a new row to the recipe step kind of table, with the text being the inputs value and the recipe being the current page recipe. Okay, and that's all what we'll need. Then we reset the input maybe. Also what we might want is a step number. So if it's the first, third, or whatever number step it is, so it's a type number. And now we have to think, how will we know the number automatically? Well, we can search the database for all steps with exactly the recipe of the current page. So again, we're searching for all steps with the recipe of the current page, and then we're counting this. So for example, if there's already 5 steps, we get a count of 5, and then we're adding 1. So if we have 5 steps, the next step we're adding is going to be the 6th. Okay, and then we need a place to display steps. Again, it's a repeating group because there's multiple steps, right? The first, etc., the third. So again, we would do a search for it. And we search for recipe steps, but only for those with the recipe of the current page. And here we show the step number, and over here we show the step text. Okay, and maybe we only want to show this input for the person who's logged in. So we put a group by control clicking and clicking group, and making it not visible and only visible when current page recipes creator, so the person who created the recipe in the first place, is equal to the current user. Then we make it visible. Other cases we will not see it. Okay, we refresh. And we notice we already don't see the input. The reason of this is because, if you remember, we actually added the lasagna underneath the recipes. Here, but it's created by the app admin, and currently Bubble does not know that I'm the app admin because I created it here instead of on the front end. So to rectify this, let's just quickly leave the step out. Just remove the entire condition and show the group anyway. So now we can add steps. So the first step would be, I don't know, wash the tomatoes, cut the onions, heat the oven, etc. Notice also the kind of 2 ways we have repeating group data here. So the first way is we added ingredients to a recipe, and so therefore it's the recipe's list of ingredients. And here we actually added steps. We didn't add steps directly to the data type recipe, because if you look, that the data type recipe does not have a list of steps. Rather, we gave each step a recipe it's associated with. So it's the other way around. So in that case, we use search for all recipe steps where the recipe is the current page recipe. Both work. It's good to know that kind of such a list of things like here, the max allowed currently for such a list of things is 10,000 rows. So just be wary to only use this for things with 10 to 100 rows. Already above 1,000 or something, I would prefer to set it up like here, recipe steps, where each step is associated with a recipe instead of having a list of steps for each recipe. Okay, just wanted to show you both ways, and we also want to order them, for example, according to the step number. and descending no. So that's first step, second step, third step. Instead of 4, 3, 2, 1, which is descending, yes. Okay. And so we join data in 2 different types here. Just have another look quickly at the workflow. So we created a step with the recipe of the current page. The step number searched for all recipes with all steps with the same recipe and counted it and added 1. And going back to data types, the tricky one was creating the recipe, because here we first had to select which ingredients we want by showing them all in a repeating group, searching for all ingredients, and then clicking add to save them to a state by taking all things already selected and adding whatever we have selected, and then taking the entire selection and setting the list of that recipe's ingredients to exactly that selection, which is also a list of ingredients. Okay. So we joined type, we had pages and data types, and we displayed types, created them, and showed types are kind of tables, whereas fields are the column headers. Well, I hope this walkthrough helped you and was extensive. Be sure to leave any questions, and do check out my site tiplista.com, which has lots of short bubble tips to help you learn Bubble. Have a good day.